Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to our February topic, our February theme in Language of the Feminine. I'm here with Emily Stewart, who is the co-creator of the Period Project. So welcome, Emily.
Hello. Hi, thank
Hello.
you.
I'm going to introduce you to everybody watching and tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do and where I met you. And then we're going to dive into this topic. And I've called the theme magical menstruation this month to bring in the
Nice.
magic of
Nice.
menstruation. So Emily is passionate about making the period conversation empowering and accessible. She's the co-founder of the Real Period Project and comes from a background of nursing. And she's currently building the project and developing educational sessions for schools. And her dream is to see a world where the menstrual cycle is seen as an ally and a teacher, and talking about it is a normal part of our life. So that sounds incredible. So I'm going to just dive in with the first question, and so we can hear a bit more about your story. So we'd love to know what your personal story around menstruation is, and what actually led you to create the Real Period Project.
Okay, great question. So I had a pretty difficult start to my menstrual cycle, probably the first 10 years or so. I started really late. I was 15. I was one of those girls who felt like I was never going to start. I was going to be the last person in the world. I was a freak of nature. And finally I did, and I had extremely painful periods. I felt very isolated at that time. I was in a girls' boarding school. I was miles away from my family. And I had this, the start of my periods just felt very isolated and very frightening, even though I was late. And even though I was older and I kind of knew what to expect, and everyone around me was used to it. No one spoke about it. Even though I was surrounded by girls, it was like this silent thing. It was almost like it didn't happen. And so I had, many years of lots of painkillers and trying the various different pills, and none of them working, hormonal pills, and having a diagnosis of polycystic ovary syndrome, and then endometriosis, and being told I might be infertile, and just this whole long process for probably 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing my nurse training later on, and so I was fully in that medical model of there's something wrong with me, my body's not functioning. Anyway, at some point in my 20s, I think I went traveling, and I came across herbal medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And by this point, I'd given up on hormonal pills because they just made me feel so ill. And so I knew I had to try something, but I didn't know what. So I came across all sorts of different alternative therapies. And one of the most powerful ones was I came across cloth pads, like reusable cloth pads.
Okay.
And I started using them and found that they made a huge difference to the pain that I was getting. My pain reduced. And something to do with me being like in touch with my blood a bit more somehow. I don't know. It felt like my sort of shame and horror of my body was reducing, and the herbs really helped. And so that kind of kick-started a whole journey towards the end of my 20s and all the way through my 30s of I started charting my cycle using fertility awareness methods, so taking my temperature and checking my mucus and doing those things to find out when I would get my period. And the main reason was because my cycle was so irregular. I had no idea when my period would come. It always took me by surprise. And so I didn't think I could do fertility awareness method. And then I discovered that by doing it, I could actually then predict when my period would come because I knew when I had ovulated. So it was hugely empowering. And then from there, I discovered Menstruality, the teachings of Alexandra Pope and Shani and Jules Wingfield, and lots of teachers who've really inspired me over the years. And then finally, in 2012, I met Jane Bennett, who created the Celebration Day for Girls, which is a really great program. It's a workshop for girls aged 10 to 12 and their mums. And it's just a way of introducing them to what it's going to be like when they get their periods. And so I trained with Jane, and I've been doing them the last 5 years. And I just felt so compelled to do that work with girls because my start had been so isolated, and so I felt so alone and so frightened. And so, yeah, that's how I got into the working with girls through. It feels like my cycle just kind of took me there.
Mm-hmm. Wow, well, that's quite a journey. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's definitely our personal experiences when we experience something to such a depth ourselves that when we want to then teach that to other people, because through our own experiences it's so much more, embodied and powerful, and so much more to teach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know what it's like to have like crippling, screaming period pain, and to feel like my body's my enemy, and all of those things. And I still, it's not like everything's perfect, but my relationship with my cycle is just, it's so different to how it was. I just know that there is a way through from that place.
And so what parts of the cycle do you teach young girls? Because I know you go to schools and you're bringing this knowledge and you want to teach young girls about their periods, but because there's multiple layers to our cycles, what parts do you teach, and why do you think it's important to teach those particular parts?
Well, first and foremost, what I think is really important is and what girls really want to know is the practicalities of how to manage a period and what it's going to be like, and what the different pads. So one of the things we do is they look at all the different things that are available, disposable and reusable. We take them apart, try them on, and they just get really familiar with all this. This is the practicality side. And also something I really feel is important is to instill an alternative view of the female body, instead of it being something gross, like as soon as they start, periods come, it's like, it's gross and disgusting, and instead really model an approach to our bodies, which is, wow, our bodies are amazing. I mean, they're really what they can do, and instill this wonder. So I have lots of pictures and props and things that I use that try and really take away that gross factor. And there's always girls that be like, oh, gross. But then we can question that and unpack it and say, well, that's interesting. What is it? Do you think, society tells us it's gross, but actually, what about this? So I think that's something really important, is instilling that wonder and the abundant, the sort of how abundant and magical our bodies are.
Oh, I love that. The wonder.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you get girls when they're a little bit younger, more like 10, 12, they're sometimes a little bit more wary about this, but 10, especially if they haven't started puberty, they're not really in it yet. They really get that. They're really excited by it. And then one of the things that I'm really passionate about, one of the reasons I wanted to start this project that I'm doing, is I feel it's really important to teach about periods in the context of the whole menstrual cycle. So in the fact that if you have a menstrual cycle, I mean, we all human beings are cyclical beings. We're all affected by seasons and cycles, whether that's through the whole year or through the day, or whatever seasons and cycles they are. But if you have a menstrual cycle, then that's another cycle within us that affects us. We're just cyclical beings. And so I think it's really important to teach periods in the context of the whole cycle, because, I mean, they need to know it to understand what a period is, but also to know that it's not just, once every however many days you bleed for a few days. It's that the period is just one part of that journey through the cycle, and the cycle's happening all the time, and you can have a different relationship with each part of it every time, and the period is just a part of that cycle. So that's something that I really bring, and I think is really important to bring, especially when talking about the period with anyone, but especially with girls when they're just starting out.
Yeah, to realise like the bigger picture, and it's not just that one focused time.
Exactly, because that can seem, I mean, it's not, you can't dress up a period and make it to be like this wonderful thing. Go, yes, periods are wonderful, you'll love it, because actually the reality for most people is they're just not, especially girls, if they've got sports classes or they're sitting an exam, or they've been invited to someone's sleepover, like the last thing they want is their period. So if we can't dress them up and say they're wonderful, we just can't. But if they can see them as part of a whole, as a part of the natural ebb and flow of life, then they make much more sense.
Yeah, I remember, at that age, I was going on a water sports holiday at school, and I had not been having my periods for that long, and I remember really kind of panicking of like, oh my gosh, what if I get my period when I'm on this water sports holiday in France and I can't go? And so that was the point where my mom took me to the doctor and put me on a a pill to delay the period so I wouldn't get it for that week. And then I came off it again, and then there was a bit of sort of disrupting and coming back to the cycle. So I can, at that age specifically, it's something that is very disrupting. Yeah,
it can be. Yeah, it really can be.
And so your company is called the Real Period Project, and you say that everyone has got their own definition of what a real period is to them and what it means to them. So I want to ask you, what does a real period mean to you? And through all the conversations, the connections you've had, what have you heard from other girls and women about what a real period is to them? What does that mean?
So yeah, when coming up with a name for a project is it was a long process for us. And so this whole process of what got us into calling it that was we started talking about, well, what is a real period anyway? Like, and the reason why that was such an important question for me is because I came from this experience of polycystic ovaries, really irregular cycle, and I kept everything I read about the menstrual cycle when I'd started to move away from the medical model and more into alternative treatments to try and heal myself with it. Was I kept reading, that it should be 28 days, and if it's not regular, then maybe there's, or if maybe there's something wrong. Maybe you're not in touch with your femininity or something. Like, there were all these kind of rather accusatory tones, even in the sort of more alternative books that I was coming across, and I just kept being so frustrated that even the term irregular, like, if you don't have a textbook, little Mitt's textbook perfect 28-day cycle, then you're somehow irregular. Even though actually, anything from maybe 20, 24, 26 days to maybe 35 days, any variation in between that is completely normal. And yet we have this impression that it's supposed to be exactly 1 month, and then there's this whole thing about you're supposed to bleed on the new moon, or supposed to bleed on the full moon, or and there's all these ways that we're supposed to fit in and fit into a box and be sort of little perfect period and perfect, and it's supposed to be this many days of this much blood and supposed to be no pain, and and actually I just think sometimes our periods are a big disruptor in our lives. They wake us up to all sorts of things, whether it's PMT, like really sort of anger in that premenstrual time, or whether it's pain when we got a period, or whatever it is. There's messages in all of those symptoms, as unpleasant as they can be. And so we were just really passionate about bringing this conversation about, well, what is, we can't define someone's period by saying it should be like this, because everyone's experience is unique and everyone's body is taking them on their own path.
Right.
And then also the other side of it was people having like their real period, whatever that looks like, in their own real life. So, there isn't a perfect way to be with your period. Like, of course, it would be wonderful if we could all take a few days off every time we bleed and completely drop everything and listen into our internal messages and all of that. I mean, that'd be wonderful. And I consider myself hugely privileged in that I'm sometimes able to have a little taste of that. But what about people who work in factories 6 days a week, 12 hours a day in some parts of the world? And what about mums with loads of young kids? And what about girls who have to go on water sports holidays? It's like we all live our real lives, and so that, quite a lot of the mums that I speak to, have all sorts of stories of times when they were younger, of going, being at their friend's granny's house and having to pretend, or being on a family holiday, and when their first period came, and all sorts of situations that they don't fit into the kind of normal, and then having to manage having this cycle in their normal lives. So it's not that we have, with the name, I just feel like, for me, it's about bringing up the conversation. Like, what does it all mean? What does it look like for you? Like, what is your experience of your menstrual cycle, and what does that mean for you? I think that's where I'm at with it. And also there is another piece as well. around keeping the language. For us at the Real Period Project, we're trying to keep our language open and inclusive as much as possible, because then there's also this piece that not everybody who has a menstrual cycle identifies as a woman, and not everyone who is a woman has a menstrual cycle. So there's that whole thing. Like, as women, we have so many places to feel shameful, and I just really want to have the menstrual cycle as somewhere that we can open it out a little bit and look at what it really means for everybody, and not shame anybody in that.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to it as you're speaking. There, the ideas of normality and feeling, we don't fit in, and it brings up so many thoughts and feelings of not being normal, whatever that is these days.
Exactly.
There is no normal, really, is there?
No, but there's this kind of presented image, like the textbook description is normal, and you deviate from that, there's something wrong with you. And I just think it's so damaging, because then we see our body as the enemy. Yes. And the menstrual cycle is so often pathologized. Like, the menstrual cycle is the problem. Like, you have a menstrual cycle, therefore you have something that's inherently not normal anyway, because it deviates from the from the male body from a scientific perspective, and so already you've got this sort of deviant thing, and then you can it's there's all these problems that any of the messages that our menstrual cycle might bring us are then pathologized as, you've got this condition and this problem, and of course that is real. Like, I really did have a lot of severe problems with my cycle, so it's not that I'm saying we make this stuff up, because we really, really, really don't make it up. Like, our body is really displaying these symptoms, but it's how we talk to ourselves about them. I just think by taking away this label of normal or abnormal or irregular, I just think it just kind of brings a bit of ease, and we can breathe a bit deeper in it, I think.
Yeah, that feels good. And so your menstrual cycle has been a real teacher for you. And we talk about, the menstrual cycle as being a teacher. I talk about that as well. And it's been my greatest teacher in my life as well. Well, you've talked a lot about the difficulties you've had. So maybe you can touch on, what you learned from that, and what that taught you, and also how you use the menstrual cycle as a teacher to bring that to other women and girls as well.
That's a lovely question. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm same as you. My menstrual cycle, I've always said that not always, but for the last good 10 years or so, my menstrual cycle has definitely been my greatest teacher. I really feel like my menstrual cycle is the one thing that consistently brings me home to myself when I pay attention.
Yes.
But it's easy to not pay attention, and it feels like any relationship. Like, my relationship with my menstrual cycle feels like, my relationship with my husband, say, for example. If I neglect it, if I don't pay any attention, if I just kind of let it sit at the side while I'm too busy doing other things, then it starts getting really annoying, and we start arguing, and it just we start rubbing up against each other. And it feels the same, once when I ignore my menstrual cycle and I don't pay it any attention, then it starts getting grumbly and maybe gives me a bit of pain, or I get sort of, like different symptoms come up to kind of go, hey, I'm here. So I just feel like the more I pay attention to it, the more I listen, the easier it is, like with any relationship. So that's been so interesting. And I discovered that through charting, like just writing down every night before I go to bed a little bit about how I felt for the day, how sociable I was, or what my energy levels were like. Just like, I don't know, 50 words or something, not very much or less. And I find if I do that consistently every day, my menstrual cycle stays really quite, it has this quite a good regular pattern. Like, nowadays, I don't have that sort of irregular all over the place thing. And the single most powerful thing that made it less all over the place was me just listening and writing down every single day. Wow. Which was quite astounding to me. But when I go off the charting, then it goes back into being a little bit wobbly, and then I go back to charting, and then I know where I'm at with it, and I can feel how I have a lot more appreciation of where I am in it. So it feels like a guide again, rather than something that kind of I'm not so aware of.
Right, because you're talking about like the whole cycle. So exactly. It's not just giving that charting and attention when you're bleeding, but
no, every day. every single day. Yeah, absolutely. So I can feel the character of my energy, the feeling of my energy, and the feeling of how sociable and how out in the world or how in myself I feel through the month. I can see it changing, and I see the patterns. I can see that on day 9 every month I have a bit of a wobble. I can see that, around this time every month, it's not a month, but for my cycle, I feel generally my energy is really good. At this time I have another wobble, so that predictability is hugely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the symptoms, some of the symptoms I've had, the pain in particular, for me has really taught me to stop and rest.
Yeah.
So I find that if I don't rest enough, so for a long time, I didn't get this. And then eventually I started just resting on the first day of my period because it was really painful. And then I discovered that if I didn't rest enough during the rest of the month, if I just kind of overrode my own ability all the time and ignored my body's calls for rest, then I would have a much more painful period and have to rest even longer when it came. So the pain for me has definitely been a teacher around just not overdoing it, not pushing myself too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really helpful. Very painful, but it's a painful lesson. But it has been really helpful because I think for my whole general health, it's a very important lesson.
So as a background as a nurse, I guess you've got a lot of knowledge about the body anyway, and that the menstrual cycle is like, I had an acupuncturist who called it like a thermometer for the rest of your health and what's going on, not just physically but emotionally and energetically and in other ways. When there's pain or when things are off, there is a deeper message. There is something that wants to be heard there. Because of our want to keep moving, keep going, that it often gets worse because there isn't that listening. I've had a very similar journey and lesson in my cycle as well, with really having to stop and rest because I literally cannot do anything. And then that turning into now it is actually a time I look forward to, because I get to have deep rest. And there's been a lot of healing for me that's come through that listening as well. So it's wonderful to hear your story. And I think just hearing other women's personal stories around their cycle is it's interesting, and it's so healing as well, because like you say, we all, with the real periods, we all have a different story.
Absolutely. And they're all really valid. Yeah.
And they're all valid. Some are similar. But the key part I'm hearing is like really about listening.
Definitely. Listening is the deep listening. And because if we don't listen, it's just going to shout louder. Like when I don't listen, my cycle shouts at me and gives me pain. And when I listen, everything's easier and my life flows easier. It just is that simple. But also, I don't want to play down the fact that I've also, for the last 10 years been doing, well, longer than that, maybe 20 years, also, did a lot of work on looking at my diet and also I had to exercise. I do have to stretch, and I have to move my body through the month. Like if I don't move enough, if I'm sat crouched on the computer, then that will make my pain worse as well. So there's all the physical side as well. But I've just noticed that all of the physical work that I've done with herbs or homeopathy or exercise or diet and all these different things that have all really helped, the one thing that has made the biggest difference has been listening and charting and just paying attention. Like consistently, that thing. The others have kind of gone up and down. They've made a difference and then it's tailed off. But whenever I chart and listen, everything is easier.
Oh, that's great. That's going to be a great thing for everyone else to hear as well. That's something that everybody could start doing now and just notice, for them, if that makes a difference as well. So thanks for sharing that point. Yeah. And so I want to ask you what your vision is for the future around, where menstrual conversations and menstrual awareness sits in our sort of larger context of society and culture in the world. What's your vision? What do you hope for?
Well, like you read at the beginning, you know, our vision with the project is to really see the menstrual cycle acknowledged and celebrated as an ally.
Yes.
Because I just think that it really is an ally. But I think that for those of us blessed to have a menstrual cycle, as much of a curse as it can feel sometimes, but I do believe it's a blessing if we can listen, if we're able to listen. And I know that's not easy a lot of the time. But I really believe that for those of us who are blessed with that and who listen and who are able to experiment with living our lives, listening to our cycle and what it's teaching us, I just think that can ripple out and really affect everybody, because we have this sort of societal way of being at the moment in our culture of everybody like being in produce mode all the time, like being productive all the time, like doing especially now. I mean, it does seem different to me than, you know, 10 years ago. Everybody I know is so busy all the time, like out there in the winter. We're busy all year, and I just feel like the menstrual cycle, it really calls us to see how our energy ebbs and flows, and to listen to that and to honor it and to let ourselves off the hook. Even if we've got young kids or a big job or something, we have to be out in the world a lot. Even if we're aware of it, of like we can sort of let ourselves off the hook and go, okay, this is my time where my energy is not high. I've got to be out there, but I'm not going to give myself a hard time for not being like super on it every single day of the year. Because so I think it's that my vision is to is that the whole cycle is recognized in that way, but also that we are able to really learn from it and be much more aware of the cycles of life. And I think that would have a huge effect on our environment, apart from anything else, because, you know, this way that our culture has of taking all the time from the earth. And if we were to be more in this ebb and flow, then it's much more of a give and take. You know, we're not going to be taking and doing all the time. And then also, my vision is that everybody is able to talk about it, that we bring it out into the conversation. And I think when we talk about the cycle as a whole, instead of focusing on this period that we're all kind of ashamed and embarrassed about, like I just think it brings air into it and makes it something that I think is really valuable. And I want every young person to be able to, you know, say where they are on their cycle and know how that affects them, and be able to talk with their friends about it, male and female, you know, all genders. I just think it would be really, it's really important that we just open this up, like airing a room, you know, let's open it up and have a conversation and look at all the different facets of it and celebrate it all.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, get all the dust out.
Yeah, absolutely. And bring some compassion for the painful parts, you know, because there are a lot of people suffering. So many women suffer so much with their cycle. And I just think if we could just bring some, be able to talk about it, bring it out in the open, and actually have some conversation, like proper dialogue about it, that isn't all constrained by sort of shame and keeping it quiet. I just think it could make such a difference.
Yeah, huge difference. And hopefully our conversation today will started that and brought some air into the topic as well. It's a fascinating topic as well, you know, because it affects everybody, it affects everything. And so it's, you know, I'm like, why do people not want to talk about it? But yeah, I love your vision for the future, and I think that that's currently happening. And we're
bit by bit,
very slowly, but we're getting there. So thank you so much for the work you're doing with girls and educating and bringing conversations around periods into the public. I'll put links to your project below, and you're welcome to comment and add anything that you'd like to add. And yeah, thank you so much for bringing your experience and your thoughts and sharing that with everybody here.
Thank you, Jane. It's been really, really nice to speak to you. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, hope you enjoyed this at home, and we will see you in the comments in the group. Okay, bye everybody. Bye.